Let's get some perspective now, and we talk to Cape Town's Head of Safety and Security. That's the MMC there, JP Smith. Mr. Smith, thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with what SANTACO has just said in that clip we've played, that you've got to recognize the service that they provide as an essential one. Do you agree with them?
Absolutely, but that's not the debate at stake. The problem isn't recognizing the industry. We work closely with the industry. I sat in 4 or at least 3 out of the 4 taxi task team meetings in the last 6 months. I have devoted many hours of engagement with Mr. Hermanus and other taxi leadership. The city is always willing to accommodate them in any of the requests, but there are a couple of non-negotiables. And so as much as Mr. Hermanus says the industry is essential, which I completely agree with, 200,000 people here who depend on that service to get to and from work and to and from places of study and otherwise, the quality of that service is equally important, and the safety thereof. We cannot have the horrific kind of incidents we saw in Mitchell's Plain recently and just say, well, those are acceptable losses. It is an order for people to drive like that. So if you're driving to oncoming traffic, if you engage in reckless endangerment, there must be consequences also. The lives of those commuters are equally important and valuable and must also be protected. And that is our duty as a road traffic authority, to make sure that we apply the law, the national law in this regard, the National Land Transportation Act, which enables for the impoundment of vehicles for driving behavior. And it's incumbent upon us, and in fact every stakeholder in government, to make sure that happens. So no lack of recognition, an eager willingness to work. I did an interview with him yesterday on ETV or ENCA where I asked if we could talk and if I could get the MEC to contact him immediately afterwards. He said he might be available from Monday on. So very much urgency from our side, always willing to resolve it, but there are some non-negotiables that cannot be set aside. And violence and attacks on other public transport vehicles, as we saw yesterday, burning out ambulances, attacking other buses, shooting a bus driver in the leg this morning, that behavior is absolutely unacceptable, deplorable, and we've asked the public for information to our tip-off line so that we can ensure that those responsible are prosecuted.
It would seem, JP Smith, that what has sparked this kind of standoff is a direct result of the city impounding taxis. And they have made an example of an ordinary motorist, that they're given a ticket. If that ticket is not paid, then the person goes to court. Still, if they don't comply, then they are taken to prison in order for them to adhere to the rules. Why is it that the city is resorting to impounding the taxis as opposed to following the steps that you would an ordinary motorist?
So there's a basic bit of misinformation in what the industry peddles there, and that misinformation is that impoundment is the only solution. We issue 130 to 260,000 fines a month. It's less than cities like Johannesburg and others, but we do significant traffic enforcement across the metro, and a pro rata proportion of that is to the minibus taxi industry along with other public transport operators. So the fines far exceed in the number of impoundments. Impoundments is a tiny percentage, and we reserve impoundments for driver behavior that is truly deplorable, where you're driving on sidewalks and causing commuters to run out of your way, where you're turning the oncoming traffic lane into another lane of traffic. So there must be more consequences. If year after year you're issuing fines and you see those fines to be ineffective, it is pointless and meaningless to continue with the same behavior. Then you must evolve your strategy. And again, let me point out that this specific action is enabled by the national legislation. The National Land Transportation Act permits and provides for such impoundments. And in the case of public transport vehicles, in addition to fines, for significant problematic driver behavior, it is appropriate that impoundment happen because the lives of those commuters matter a great deal to us.
Yeah, and that cannot be that cannot be underplayed, JP Smith. The safety of commuters, and I don't think anyone can argue with that. But for the current situation to be resolved, comments from yourself saying that should there be any torching or any public violence, you are going to impound a collective of I think, over 20 vehicles, even if those are not part of the torching. That collective punishment, does that make sense to you when the situation is as tense as it is?
It is a position that leadership, my city leadership, has agreed on, because there must be consequence management. The industry is busy with some role players, maybe not everyone in the industry is busy with a very evil game, a game of intimidation, violence, and threats. And there must be a calculus in that says that every one of these actions I perpetrate has a consequence. They are a collective body who are collectively agreeing on strike action. They are leadership who must take responsibility for the actions of people they claim to lead. Otherwise, they are not truly their leadership. And what we will do, as we have done in previous incidences in other areas where such violence has broken out, is that we have gone and intensified our enforcement, not withdrawn, and ensured that there is effective consequence management and continued that enforcement until a situation has been achieved where the calculus, that math that may be happening on the other side of this economic sabotage that is underway, says to the people responsible, this is not in our interest to continue doing this.
All right, JP, someone listening is going to say, if Mr. Smith is indeed as concerned about the safety of commuters, then you have got to, right now, implement a strategy that says the only way for commuters to get around then, they have to get onto buses, whether it be My City or Golden Arrow, and those buses must be escorted not just from town to the periphery of the township, but they must get inside the township. Are you willing to do that? Because commuters' lives are indeed at stake.
That is exactly what we're doing, sir, with the understanding that at a certain point, your threat assessment must say that the certainty of the bus being stoned or petrol bombed is such that the life of the commuter, when entering some of the hotspots, is too great that we can almost certainly be assured that this bus will be burnt out. Those buses cost multiple millions of rands each. There is a finite supply of them. You cannot force the companies to take them into harm's way. So we are escorting buses in most of the city. Operations are running normally with limited impact, but there are some hotspots where the taxi associations have made that extremely difficult and where commuters have to be picked up on the periphery. We would like all public transport services to run without interference, because that is in fact what our law says. The law, no strike action, permits the industry to engage in the violence and criminality it is currently engaging in. And I find it difficult to understand, through the line of questioning you're directing at me, I fail to see you condemning those behaviors in the equivalent manner. The argument here isn't why or how the city must escort buses for their safety. The argument or the question is, how dare any person attack the property or assets of another person and harm a bus driver who is just busy doing his job? Those are deplorable actions, and we need to see more widespread condemnation of that. In the meantime, we'll do what we can as the city.
JP Smith, I am in no way condoning that kind of behavior. In fact, that is criminal behavior. Again, it is your duty as the MMC of Safety and Security to make sure that those culprits are thrown directly inside prison. But what's going to end this, though, JP Smith? You said you have asked for a meeting, and that meeting can only possibly take place on Monday. In the meantime, people have got to get to work, otherwise they're going to lose jobs. How is this going to be solved?
That's exactly why we are this morning from very early started with SAPs, with all available resources across the city directed at this, escorting buses, keeping commuters safe, keeping ranks safe, trying to help everybody to get to work as best we can, seeing with the public transport operators how we can optimize additional resources to compensate for the taxis withholding their service. The doors to the SANTACO remain open. We are not the ones who terminated the conversation. There was a meeting scheduled for Monday, which they walked away from. So we have never shut the door on conversation. The industry did, without warning and without consultation. So they must take a very large responsibility for what I do believe is an irrational decision. The impoundment to which they refer has been going on for at least the last 2 years that we've been using the provisions of that act in that manner. It didn't happen last week. The only thing that happened this week is that a traffic officer was assaulted at the station deck and 4 live rounds were shot at police by people within that crowd of taxi protesters. That's what happened at the station deck that precipitated this conflict.
JP Smith, let's leave the conversation there. Thank you very much for your time. Well, yeah, that's the situation right now in Cape Town.